you're going to get 35 grand supposedly. Now, I don't know if this thing ever recorded. I like to tell myself that it did not, so that I did not get rejected.
Sure. Go ahead. Tell yourself that if it makes you sleep at night.
I never, does, Todd.
So that's our first tip. Lie to yourself.
Lie to yourself.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Outsiders.
I'm Seth Austin.
And I'm Todd Pickering.
And we're a couple of actors stuck on the outside trying to make our way to the inside of the biz.
Hollywood, baby.
Man, let's do this, Todd. All right.
Let's do this. What's the topic today, Seth?
The topic,
and if you, before we forget, you can email us at
theoutsidersbiz@gmail.com. That's theoutsidersbiz@gmail.com.
B-I-Z, like Liza with a Z.
Just like Liza with a Z. We're just as cool as her, because today we are talking about rejection.
Which is a topic I know a lot about.
Right? I mean, you know what though, Todd? That just means you've been in the game for a while. That means you've had a lot of auditions, right? So as actors, the longer you're in this business, the more you're going to get rejected. And I would argue the more you get rejected, the better, actually, because that just means that you are getting a lot of auditions, right? And that you are, if you're doing it right, you're going to learn from these experiences and you're only going to get better. Nevertheless, rejection is a very difficult thing, or can be a very difficult thing for anyone to deal with, especially actors. You know, we sink our hearts and our souls into these auditions, and then we get told, or even worse, which happens pretty much all of the time, you get told nothing. You have radio silence. You don't even get the courtesy of like a, hey, sorry, brother, you didn't get the role. You don't get that.
People. I have heard that the fact, this is just throwing it out there, you tell me if you've heard this, but that for every 50 auditions, you get a call back.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, the exact stat that my very first acting teacher told me back in the day, or was close to that anyway, back in like,
yeah, I don't believe it, but
eighth grade.
I don't believe it as an empirical number, but I think that's about correct.
Yeah.
I will say per that, if you are getting 5 or 6 auditions a week, then rejection isn't as big of a thing. It's when you get 1 audition a month, it means so much.
It does.
You put everything in that.
Yep. I mean, I've had, oh man, you know, I've had some unfortunate things myself where getting rejected from one thing just kind of crushed me for a while. It was this one voiceover, and I was just new with this agent in New York, and this non-union voiceover, I was non-union at the time, was going to pay me 35 grand if I booked it. And it was a series of rhyming couplets about Coke Zero. And,
well, sure, Coca-Cola's got more money than God.
Right. And so even and this was when non-union stuff still paid decently, right?
Oh, this was non-union?
This was non-union. This was, but it was a 1 session fee, right? You weren't going to make the residuals or anything like that, but you were going to get 35 grand supposedly. Now, I don't know if this thing ever recorded. I like to tell myself that it did not, so that I did not get rejected.
Sure. Go ahead. Tell yourself that if it makes you sleep at night.
No, I never. Does, Todd.
So that's our first tip. Lie to yourself.
Lie to yourself. I mean,
Definitely.
whatever. You know, honestly, why not? Right? So
why
I
not?
did. I tried to search this Coke Zero out on the internet. I tried to find it on YouTube, and I couldn't find it. So to this day, I still lie to myself and say, no, it never recorded.
So we're going to say to everybody, if you listen further, we're each going to tell a major rejection story. So if you want to hear our heartache, that also helps with your rejection, is hearing how poorly other people rejection. But let's start with our tips, which I haven't thought about or written down. I'm winging it here. I'm winging it.
Stick around till the end, because you're going to hear our really sad, pathetic loser stories.
I might think of a million more, but I'm going to stick to my first rejection story that we thought about. So that's a great tip that just plopped out of our mouths. Is that lie to yourself. You don't get a rejection notification. So say, hey, you know what? They canceled that commercial.
It doesn't matter, because it doesn't, whatever makes you, you know, you need to figure out what works for you, right? So if lying to yourself works for you, go for it. Okay, so
I've got a good tip.
Go ahead.
Do you have one?
I do. I have a lot. I have quite a lot to say on this.
Okay, you probably have more than I do, so go.
So I think the first thing you have to understand is that very little, if anything, is within your control. Like none of it is within your control, almost. And by that, I mean, you could walk into that room and you have prepared so well. You are so ready for this. You are so relaxed. You are so into this thing. You're giving, you're kind, you're everything that you should be in that room. But you are 2 inches too tall. but you look like the director's ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, who are they are in a contentious divorce with. And so you are
Right.
not going to get this role. No matter how well you do in this audition, there's just so much that is out of your control. And so you just have to you have to make peace with that and know that.
Yes, that's a great one.
Right.
That's the first one. You have to assume when you walk in, you are going to end up being the wrong type, probably for that reason, that you look like the ex-wife of the director.
Because so often it's type is 80% of it, right? For better or worse, type is such a huge chunk of it. And so you just don't fit that type for whatever reason. And that is completely out of your control. Maybe you thought you would look better with no beard, and so you shaved, and turns out they didn't even say anything, but they actually wanted a beard, or vice versa. Anyway, so that said,
that's a great tip. In fact, that was one of mine. If I thought about my long list, I didn't write anything down, so I'm spitballing. My tip is a big deal with being a redhead. I was called at the last minute from my agent to rush to an audition that was going to be filmed in Nashville.
Oh.
And clearly they called back a redheaded child, and they hadn't called in any redheaded actors. So I was rushed there because the children will come from the city. So the children would have to come from Nashville.
Right.
But all the talent was flying in from LA.
Got it.
So at the 11th hour, they called back a kid, because kids book it first. Adults never book it first. They find the cute kid. And one of the kids was a redhead. So there was zero pressure, because I'm like, the redheaded kid doesn't book it, I don't get to be the dad. I just showed up. It was a no-liner thing. The good news was they let me read for a few other parts.
Oh,
and it was the last minute, and the casting director, thanked me profusely for rushing in. So it's a win-win. But again, that kind of takes the pressure off of it, knowing that, they're looking for, it's family casting, I guess is the point. So it doesn't matter how good you are. If your daughter or your wife does not accept the role, then they go with the backup family, the other family.
Again, that's a very specific example of so much being out of your control. Now, that said, the things that are within your control, which is, again, a very narrow slice of the pie, are your preparation. And part of that is like, dressing to suggest the part, which don't overthink it. Of course, that's the caveat there. You don't want to overthink any of this, right? But your preparation, I think, is the only thing that's more or less fully in your control. And even that sometimes isn't, right? Because you may have a morning call at 10 a.m. and you are on your bartending waiter shift, and you get the notification at 4:30 when you're already on your shift, and you have to be there at 10 a.m. the next day, right? So even your preparation, is not 100% under your control. That said,
well, that's not going to help with rejection.
Well, you want to be as prepared as possible, so that you walk out of there knowing that you gave it all that you could, so you're not second guessing.
Good point. I see your point. Your point is you can handle, as long as you do everything in your power that you can. It doesn't matter if you don't get it.
Right. You walk out of there knowing you left it all on the stage. You left it all on the table, and you got nothing else to give. So if they don't cast you, then that's not your fault. So it was absolutely due to those factors that are completely out of your control, right? And so
I feel like we talked about this last week. I think we made this point. Maybe that's why you got the idea to do this episode. Because the other thing I said last week, I think, maybe it's just deja vu, is make sure you have somewhere to go. You have a husband, a wife, a favorite bar, a favorite bartender.
Right.
If you don't drink, it's a restaurant, your favorite food. You have something to do right afterwards. Because if you don't have an audition the next day, that's the best. But if you don't, if you have one audition a week, make sure you have something to do after the audition to treat yourself. And if you're broke, it could be as simple as going on a hike, just
getting up with a friend, hanging out. So
have that friend that you call, and have that friend that you call please be a non-actor. My best friend's not an actor, and she thinks I'm the world's greatest actor, and she'll book everything. So that makes me feel good.
Right.
Or if they won't, your friends sometimes, maybe you do call your actor friends, because your non-actor friends don't get that they don't call you to say you didn't get it.
That is the thing I was going to mention, right? So I used to get
yes.
This wasn't right. Like, this was my fault for getting annoyed with some of my non-actor friends, because they would they would think they would be doing the right thing by asking me, oh, how did it go? When do you hear? And then a week later they would check in again, knowing that I had an audition. And in my head, I'm like, I just want to forget about it, And so I
Choose
think
wisely.
choose wisely. Maybe don't even tell the person you're calling that you had an audition. You're doing it just for a distraction, right? So
Yes.
to,
There you go.
to piggyback on that, a close friend of mine had this incredible, and I've talked about this friend before. She had an incredible career. She booked 6 pilots.
Jeez.
None of them got picked up,
Ugh.
right? But that's fine. She had 6 pilots, and eventually, if she had stayed in the business, she had health problems. She could not stay in the business. Not her own fault. Her health took over, and she has to deal with that now. Unfortunately, it's really tragic because she was crazy, crazy, crazy talented and on her way up. Anyway, this friend of mine had obviously figured out how to handle this rejection thing, right? And some of the rejection stories that she told me were insane, but she had developed a very healthy mental attitude toward these rejections. And she said that she treated auditions as an interruption to her day. So this piggybacks on what you were talking about, right? So she had her morning planned, she had her afternoon planned, and the audition was just an interruption to that, right? It was a thing she had to do to get it over with, but then she went on with the rest of her day as if it had never happened. Let it go, right? And so, so to piggyback on that for myself, or it's sort of my own version of that, the analogy that I have made in my mind is that an audition is like the bodily function you may have in the morning, right? Now you prepare for this bodily function, right? By eating healthy, by exercising, by getting good sleep. Same way you prepare for your audition by really, being well-versed with the script, being flexible. But as much as you prepare, that audition, that bodily function may not be very fulfilling at the end of the day. You may not get the result that you wanted, right? But it was a thing you had to do. Now it's over. You move on with your day. Some are good, some are bad. You don't let it affect the rest of your day, the rest of your week, your general mental health from that point on. Once it's over, it's over. And
That's the key.
One personal thing that I do is that I take my sides, and as soon as I'm out of that, away from that audition space, I trash them. I throw them in the garbage. I don't keep them in case I get called back. If I get called back, I print them out again. I want those audition sides gone so that I am no longer thinking about it. And again, that's just a personal tip, but it works for me. I have a printer at home. I think actors are some of the only people that still have printers, so that we can print out sides and not have to make a million trips to Staples to do that. Yeah, I think those are my big tips. Yeah.
Do we want to tell some of our rejection stories?
Yeah.
Make people feel better because we can talk about how rejected we were.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. You want to go first, Todd? Go ahead.
Well, sure. I got my equity card in a 6-person show that was recasting, and the lead was the only one coming back. So we rehearsed it. It was a long-running show. I won't name names and places, and San Francisco is where it was. So we had 6-week contracts they assured us that we were fantastic and they would be renewed. So the lead was coming back after a 6-week vacation because he'd been doing the show for a couple of years. It was playing in 4 different cities. So he had moved to do the San Francisco production. It's going to take a 6-week break and then come back. So the guy that was playing his role knew he only had a 6-week contract. I was the understudy of the lead because, swings and understudies, the way they do shows, equity, for those of you that don't know, if you're union, is that, there's an understudy for every character, and then there clearly would have been understudies that don't perform, whatever. So turned out that that actor became really good friends with the director. I think
the lead actor became really good friends.
The lead actor that was just there on the 6-week contract. So when the 6-week contracts were renewed, mine was not renewed, and he took my part so he could understudy. And then here's the clincher. Here's the rejection. That was bad enough. But it turned out he didn't like that role, and he quit after a few weeks or months. So I could have had a full-time acting gig, my first full-time acting gig, because the show ran for about another year. It did close. Like
But they
some
didn't.
shows
So the
do.
rejection was they didn't call you after that to bring you back.
Yeah.
So that to me, that's the ultimate rejection, right? So this guy takes your role from
Yep.
you, and
Well,
then
didn't take it. You know, in
yeah,
all fairness, and people were like, somebody was saying I should complain. It's like, no, I had a 6-week contract.
right.
There was
So
nothing illegal about what they
what
did.
they
I
did,
signed on for a
yeah,
6-week contract.
yeah.
I had a verbal agreement, but it was, yeah.
That's an ouch for sure because again they could have easily just been like, oh well, okay, so this guy that we preferred didn't want the role. Well, we had Todd, and we could
I
just
think
bring
they called
Todd
back the
back.
guy. I think the guy that had the cast had all quit because they were looking for other gigs. Were getting a little cocky, and no gigs came through. I think the original guy that originated the role came back. They asked him first if he wanted it because
Gotcha.
they probably felt I would say no with sour grapes.
Right. They probably, it might have been that they were embarrassed, sort of, that they had done that to you a little bit, and they didn't want to deal with they didn't want to have that awkward conversation because you would kind of have a right to have sour grapes, So they probably were just trying to avoid what could have been an awkward conversation. Now it wouldn't have been because you would have
there
been
is more
gracious.
insult to injury. It's a long story, but they had hired a celebrity for one of the roles who had a nervous breakdown. And we had to recast it, which was a very difficult rehearsal process. And she sued them. And I was, my first equity show, I was the equity deputy. So I had to go back after I was let go and testify as the equity deputy as what happened with her breakdown.
That's unbelievable.
So that's more insult to injury. So my first equity gig was not great.
Yeah, it sounds like a train wreck, and maybe it's good that you got out of that situation.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a lot of nonsense. And I'm sorry
that wasn't
happened.
a problem with equity. It was just an unusual situation, and the show didn't last very long in San Francisco. So that was an insult to injury. It didn't go off to be the world's greatest show, and
yeah. What are you gonna do? So my story involves also is a theater thing. My rejection story. It was a situation. So I had gotten called back for this show. Actually, me and my friend Mike had both gotten called back for the show, and in different roles. We weren't going out for the same role, so we could have been in it together, which would have been fantastic. And it was going to be a pretty good showcase for both of us. They were juicy roles, both of them. And I got an email after the callback, maybe a day later, saying, "We are happy to offer you this role. Welcome to the cast." Woohoo! Right? I think an hour later or something.
I think you told me this story.
This
is so painful. This should be making you all feel better out there. Both these stories.
I got an email saying, "We are so embarrassed. We are so sorry. This is 100% our fault, but we sent you that email by mistake. We are offering it to another actor and something." And they were, honestly, they were very gracious about it. They said like that they were excited about the prospect of having me do the role. So excited. That's probably why they accidentally sent me the email. Now I'd like to imagine, now this is again, maybe where I'm lying to myself, where there was something.
Lie to yourself, baby.
Right. Where there was something that, again, like maybe they did actually want me for the role, but maybe they wanted another actor more for the other role. And I think they did say something about like, we wanted you in conjunction with this other actor, but like something like they either didn't like the other actor quite as much, or something off about just like, you know what I mean? Like I didn't work with the other actor that they really wanted more, in other words, or something like that. It was something about a matchup situation, where I think they wanted to cast me with my friend, but there was something off about that matchup in their eyes. So they went with the other matchup.
Right. What I just said about like a family.
Right, exactly. It was that kind of a thing.
When they cast families, they definitely cast certain actors and they don't mix and match them.
Right. So, and I was gracious in my reply, but it was pretty crushing, and my friend who has auditioned for business. My friend who had made it to the top of the game where she had gotten 6 pilots and all that. She has stories like the ones that I just told, like where she accidentally got offered roles that weren't hers, worse, multiple times, and at a much higher level. So I think the moral of the story is you have to be prepared for that. Not just, so the thing that my friend and I had auditioned for was, I think it was a step above like an equity showcase code. Like this was not a big project, right?
Got it.
Um,
And the
so
show I was in was just a fun little show.
right. So the moral of the story is you have to be mentally sound to the point where you can handle these kinds of things happening at the very highest level of the game. You could be slated to make or $30 or $40,000 for a pilot, and then $30,000 per episode, and they accidentally send you an email that says you got it, and you didn't get it, right? You have to be mentally prepared for that level of just complete insanity, rejection, whatever you want to call it.
I'll leave you on a depressing note as we wrap up. Is that I do know for a fact that sometimes they offer a name actor. That's when they put it out to people that have had credits of being on TV shows only. Yeah. So they're only looking at those people. They audition those people. Their agents don't like the money, so they basically say no, but the deal's still on the table. So to pressure that actor, they hold auditions. Exactly. And I know somebody that was texting me once, and I said, "Aren't you at a big audition?" And he goes, "I can hear them in the other room on the phone with the actor. So I don't care anymore." Meaning they literally held this audition to hold it over to get the
leverage. They leverage it.
Leverage. Leverage. That's what I'm. Yeah. So I guess we're just warning you. It's ugly out there. Be prepared.
Be prepared for all that. And one thing that I guess I sort of alluded to this idea, but much like in like romantic relationships, you're not going to get closure most of the time, right? You be human beings as a species. We want closure with these kinds of things, especially when it comes to a rejection, right? And you're not going to get it. You're never going to get it. And my someone in my family who had a marriage end recently was telling me about how her therapist eventually got her to the place where she could get past the point of needing closure from the end of her marriage. And that's really hard. And again, as actors, we want that closure. We want to know why we didn't get the role. And if you need to talk to your therapist to figure out how to get past the point of needing closure, do that, figure out what works for you to deal with that rejection.
Here's a tip too. Is a good movie to think about is the documentary Every Little Step. Only time Equity allowed the casting of the Broadway revival of A Chorus Line. And it was filmed by documentary makers that were not theater people. So they had a good eye. And it showed too that, and they end up following like 4 or 5 out of the 17 roles of the chorus line. They follow the two people that are called back. One of them gets it, one of them doesn't. They follow them.
Wow.
And
I need to watch this.
You do. I just recommended that to a friend of mine who was worried about the biz, and it's about rejection. And you get to watch the do's and don'ts, because there's some things actors do. You're like, sometimes you just don't get it.
Yeah, I had forgotten about this documentary because it was recent, right?
It's 10 years old.
Is it that old already?
10 years ago.
Okay, that's why I forgot about it. Because that show, in my mind, it still feels recent because I remember that whole show.
I'm guessing it's about 10 years old. And I saw that production. So I got to see every single actor that was in the documentary. It debuted in San Francisco when I lived there before it went to Broadway, because when the original production toured, they went to San Francisco first. So they reversed for good luck, their out-of-town tryout wasn't Boston, it was San Francisco. Huh. So I couldn't miss the opportunity to see that. And I think the documentary might have come out after I saw it. I don't know where it fell. Probably after.
Yeah.
But the point is, I actually saw all those actors you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, and watch that again. That's a perfect thing to bring up, because the whole point of this episode was dealing with rejection, and you can watch actors have to deal with it in front of cameras. I mean, that's very meta, right? It's like,
yep. Well, like the bottom line is it's the real A Chorus Line. It's more realistic.
Right. It takes that
more
show
realistic than the movie, the terrible Richard Attenborough movie they made in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, the show is. I always forget that Chorus Line is about that, the actor's life getting rejected and all that. And now we're doing a documentary about the actors getting rejected from being in the show.
It's totally meta.
It's as meta as it could possibly get.
And it's a brilliant documentary, standing alone, because it was made by documentarians that weren't theater people.
Right.
And they were
right.
blown away. They were like, this is so heart-wrenching filming these actors auditioning.
I mean, there's a lot of beauty in there too. I need to watch this. I need to watch
Yes, you
this.
do. All right.
All right.
So
thanks,
we'll
everybody. Email us at theoutsidersbiz@gmail.com. Have a great week. Stay sane. Talk to your therapist.
Which is us right now. Bye.
Bye.